Hello, welcome back to the Guitar Gym for Rookies. As you can tell, this is my temporary digs. I was broadcasting from the woodshed up until now. I moved to a new place and this is in the basement. So if you hear any crazy sounds in the middle of it, we have an air conditioner, we have a 4-year-old upstairs and a sump pump, and we're gonna try to keep everything quiet. But starting next week, I'll have a new woodshed, so you'll see a different background here. But I hope you had a great week off, and we want to jump back in here with Jam Play and just keep talking about the Guitar Gym for Rookies and some of the things that you can really do to help think training smart on the guitar, right? We've talked about the concept of this course is not just putting in your time, but making sure you find the best, most efficient way to practice and to play. So last time we talked about going through all the different ways to sort of use your pick, right? We talked about alternate picking, we talked about economy picking, and the best way to kind of position the pick. I tend to use these small Jazz 3 picks. These are made by Dunlop, and this is the Ultex. I really like the sound of these. But if you want to review, you can go back to that lesson and review from there. Today we're going to kind of expand on what we did last week with that alternate picking and put it specifically over major scales. So this week, playing major scales. The major scale is really the foundation of absolutely everything. So I'm sure you've heard that analogy that the major scale is sort of like the alphabet, and arpeggios, chords, progressions, those are all kind of like vocabulary words, right? And so the more vocabulary you have, the more comfort you have with that, then the more you can express and explore, and that's the important thing. So the foundation of a major scale is really good. The problem is we're such a shape-driven animal when we play guitar. If it's not under the fingers in a certain sequence we learn the first few years, oftentimes it just sort of, the rest of the fretboard feels a little bit foreign. So I want to talk about what a major scale is today, but I also want to make sure that we're shining a flashlight on some of the dark areas of the fretboard so you can see everything is connected. When you watch a really great player just sort of all up and down the neck, just knowing exactly where everything is, it's not because they're some alien from outer space, it's become familiar territory. And they started to see relationships between different spots on the fretboard. So that's what I want to start to unlock today. Not just playing a sequence of fingers, right? But starting to recognize that these patterns are found all over the fretboard. So we'll kind of start with one scale. We'll do this all in G today, but we're going to start with a sort of an open position. We'll do it in 1 octave. Then we're going to kind of build into playing 2 octave scales and 3 octave scales. And so a lot of what we'll go through today might sound very similar, but when we put it on different spots of the fretboard, now you start to be comfortable with how to shift from position to position. You might play a scale here. You can also play that here, right? And what's beautiful about the guitar is that same exact pitch has a different sound to it. If I play a G here, right? It's the same pitch as this, which is the same pitch as this, and the same pitch as this, right? And if you have a guitar that has the intonation a little out, you'll notice it here. So watch out for that. When the economy opens back up, get yourself a good guitar repairman and fix that. But what's great about that is, yes, it's the same pitch, but we can play that in different spots of the fretboard. We can do the same thing with scales, with chords, arpeggios. There's all kinds of interweaving patterns, right? So we want to start to uncover what that means today. The very first exercise, if you want to, everyone say hello to Jason again. Hi, Jason. We're going to do exercise number 1. And this is a very common, the major scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, when you learn hot cross buns, right, in first grade with your little recorder jamming out. I'm sure everyone went through this scale before. But again, the whole idea here is to not look at all of these and feel like you have to just aim immediately for mastery. Good guitar playing, good progress is not aiming for mastery, but continued familiarity. I think that's really important because if you don't beat yourself up and say, oh, I should know this already, or you're watching somebody else that you like to jam with, watch somebody else play and you're like, oh, I should know this already. No, you're just unfamiliar. And I think that puts you in a certain mindset to be able to really learn something thoroughly. All right, so in exercise 1, we're going to start with the pick. We're going to do our down, up, down, up. And I have this listed here as in exercise number 1. You can refer to the tab there at 120 beats per minute, but I want to play this at 72 because 72 is awesome. So I'm going to play this on my click here. And what we want to do is actually just start with open G. And we're going to start by just going from open G all the way up to G here. So it's 1 octave of a scale. And what you want to do is sort of just be aware of what fingers you're playing with, right? So if you're starting open, you want to make sure your second finger will go on the 2nd fret. So we're sort of almost reserving in this position, 1st fret notes are going to be with your 1st finger, 2nd fret notes with your 2nd, and go from there. And we're also going to be doing a down, up with this pick. Not this one right here. Down, up, down, up. If you feel, like we said last time, if you feel more comfortable doing the economy picking, which was when you cross to the next string, you stay in the same direction. So instead of down, up, it would be down, up, down, down. You know, when you go to the next string, you just stay in the same direction. If that feels more comfortable to you, awesome. Go ahead and do that. Economy picking, alternate picking, it's all good. All right, so here we go. 72. Let's try to play through this together. Hopefully that's not too loud there. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Again. So that's the introduction. That's sort of a small piece of one of the first scales that almost everybody learns. It's really good to make sure that you can play, again, we've talked about this in a previous lesson, to make sure that you play the simple stuff really well, really clean, and to play the more complicated stuff really clean. But if you just aim for playing something that's complicated, you might feel a little bit messy, you know? So sometimes it's good to just get the metronome on even slower. And sometimes I'll take just a scale like this and try to make something that feels like something I learned years ago that I can play it really clean. So this is reminding me of areas that I need to practice, and I think that's always good. Again, you have to re-familiarize yourself with things, or familiarize yourself with brand new things, but don't ever feel like, oh, I should know this already. Don't beat yourself up, because that never works, right? It always drags you down, you know? Okay, the very second one, what I want to talk about in this one is that we're going to talk about how like a major scale is built, what that means in terms of going from note to note. But also, this is sort of an introduction into, if you've ever heard the term modes before. There is these Greek words, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Aeolian, Mixolydian, Locrian. You don't have to know all of those terms, but the start of understanding how those terms are coming into play is still all based on the major scale. So if you see those, if you see them written somewhere, or somebody's trying to impress you and was like, yeah, man, I really like C Lydian, and you're like, I don't know what that means. Just know, okay, it's a branch of the major scale, right? So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing here is that on the guitar, there's 2 ways to go up in pitch, right? And this is a really good way to visualize the fretboard. We want to train smart in the Guitar Gym for Rookies. So you can go up this way, or if you go up in, as the strings get thinner, obviously it goes up in pitch. Typically we'll say, you know, go down towards the floor if you go up to the next string. So sometimes that can be a little bit confusing. But that's sort of thinking about it vertical, right? But guitar is very horizontal shape driven as well. So we can play the same scale, right? All on the same string. So if we start that on the low E string, it doesn't matter what finger you use here, but here's what's interesting is that as your ear, because our ear is pretty comfortable with what the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, that is a very familiar sound. What's good about this is you can you'll know when you hit a wrong note. Okay, that doesn't sound quite right. Right, so use what knowledge you have already, just being alive and born into into society, knowing the major scale. It's in every melody you've ever heard and hummed, you know. Use that to your advantage to sort of correct if you hit a wrong note. So we're going to start with the 3rd fret here, then we go to the 5th fret, and then 7, 8, 9, 8 to 10, then to 12, and then you have 14, and then we end on 15 all the way up here. If you have a guitar that doesn't have the cutaway, it can be a little bit tricky to reach all the way up here, and that's fine. Just remember on the fretboard, fretboard is sort of like a conveyor belt, meaning whatever notes get pushed off here, if you can't reach anymore, typically they're going to be an octave lower, right? So if I play the 15th fret here, but I can't quite reach it, the 15th fret is actually the 3rd fret, just a pitch higher, right? So sometimes just picturing that the entire fretboard isn't just one, you know, massive sprawled out thing, it's actually kind of a repeating thing. So whatever notes or patterns or chords get bumped off here, you can't reach anymore, they'll come up an octave lower down on the side. So that conveyor belt, or you know, when you go to the grocery store and you put your groceries on the belt and you see that little strip that connects the rubber, you can see how it goes under and then it comes back. And I remember as a kid thinking like, that's what a guitar fretboard is like, because I'm a nerd and you are too, that's why you're here, it's just great. So yeah, so think about the conveyor belt idea there. So now we're going to go from here, and to get a standard major scale, this is kind of the formula or the recipe that equals a major scale, is going to be a whole step, which means 2 frets. If you hear the term half step, that means 1 fret. So if you go from this one, you know to get to the next one, we're going to have to do a whole step. And then from here, we have to do another whole step, which means go 2 frets, right? So the formula is starting like this. The distance between the first note and the second note is going to be a whole step. So a whole step. Then we do a whole step higher. Now if I went like this, that sounds a little bit out, right? So if your brain hears it as something a little bit, that doesn't sound quite right, try a local fret and see if it kind of goes back into what your ear already finds familiar. Okay, there we go. So this is the 8th fret. So now from here we have a whole step between here, a whole step, and then a half step here. And then we go to a whole step up to the 10th fret, another whole step, another whole step, and then a half step to start again. So that pattern is basically a whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. 2 wholes, 1 half. Then 3 whole steps, 1 half, right? What's cool about that pattern is just getting comfortable with what that is. You can play in any key, because any note that you start on, if you do that whole step, half step, whole step, you know, if you do that, it's always going to be a major scale. So that's kind of the underlying formula that makes up a major scale. So if you ever get lost and you feel like, don't remember the pattern, right? Just think, okay, where am I? Let's start back. Okay, I have a whole step, a half step. Sometimes it's easier to just think about the formula that way. So let's try this together. We're just going to go all the way up. This is number 2. We'll go all the way up and then back down. So as soon as you get up to 15, then we're going to go back down. So again, we'll try this exercise 2 at 72 beats per minute. Ready? 1, 2, ready, go. more time. Now what's cool is that this is sort of, we talked about this is sort of an introduction to modes, which we can cover in another lesson. But what's interesting is that for every stop, right, we talked about the guitar, there's vertical shapes, right, that will go this way. For every time we advance horizontally, there's also going to be another shape that goes vertically. And then you go to the next one, and then that goes vertically, and from there. That's where modes are sort of derived from, and then it gets pretty complex after that. But the basic idea is just all branching from a major scale. Each note of a major scale has sort of a subscale attached to it. All right, so let's talk about exercise number 3 here. So exercise number 3, the basic idea with this one is now we're just going to do an open position starting on the low E string, and we're going to go two octaves altogether, okay? So the 2 octaves are going to start here, and we're going to end all the way up here. And remember, at any point, you know, just type in your questions, and our wonderful employee at Jamplay, Jason, will. I have a little screen here, and I can answer those questions for you. So he'll send them on through. So what we want to do is actually think about reserving a finger for each fret. So take your 3rd finger, and you're going to play that on the 3rd fret of the low E, right? Then the next one is going to go, your second, you know, you're going to go open on the A string, but then your 2nd finger goes on the 2nd fret on the A as well here. All right? So again, this idea of sort of not just playing the right notes, but really being mindful of what finger you're playing them with. And that's not just to sort of follow the rules. It's actually an easier memory device, because you'll notice that if you play it with different fingers every time, then every time that note comes up, your brain is like, okay, what are we gonna do? I'm not sure, we did it different last time. You wanna sort of really ingrain your muscle memory with a pattern. And from that point, it makes it a whole lot easier to grasp the rest of the scale, all right? So we're gonna start here on the 3rd fret of the low E, and then we're gonna go to the A string, open, and you'll notice that's the same as what we did before. From there, right? So we have 3rd fret here, then open A, then we have the 2nd fret, and then the 3rd fret on the A, right? Because that's our half step there. And we're gonna go to an open D, and then your second finger there, and then your 4th, right? 4th goes on the D string of the 4th fret. Then you have your G open. And now we're kind of connecting to where exercise 1 came from, right? Then we go to the 2nd fret, and then you have a B, 1st, 3rd, then high E, and then 2nd fret. There you go, and then all the way up to the 3rd fret here. And then we're gonna go up from there and then back down till we get all the way back to our G there. This is a really common scale that you'll see quite a bit. Right, a lot of, you know, just a brief example there, a lot of riffs will come from that when you see a lot of like bluegrass. Right, this is the open position scale shape. Having a good handle on this is important when you're playing in that, when you're playing in G, and G is a very common key, so it's good to know this. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do at 72 beats per minute. And if you find that this is going a little bit too quick, that's fine. You know, we can either slow it down a little bit, just let me know in the tab box, or if you want to kick it up a notch, that's fine too. I feel like 72 is a good meeting point, so we'll progress from there till I hear otherwise. So let's try it together. So exercise number 3, take a look at the tab. Here we go, 72 beats per minute. 2, 1, 2, ready, go. again. Again. One more time. Excellent. Okay. So we have a question here. So if I use the vertical pattern on a different note of the horizontal pattern, does that give me a different mode? If I use the vertical pattern here on a different note, of the horizontal pattern, does that give me a different mode? Yes. So one thing that's interesting is that if we were to keep, if I were to move this shape here, let's see, I think this is the very next, in an exercise coming up. If you were to take the exact same shape that you used and just shifted that up to the next fret, that will just change the key there. But remember, a mode is basically, so if we start from a G and go up to a G, all right, that would be your G. It's called the G major, G Ionian. But now if you play the exact same notes, but you start one note higher and end one note higher, right? So we start on the A instead of starting on the G, but we make sure we play the same notes, then you end up with this sound. And end all the way up on A here. But what's interesting about that is you still are keeping that same scale pattern. Remember that sort of, that formula we talked about, that whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So when you shift up to the next note, there is a shape that goes vertically, but the actual sequence of fingers does change just a little bit. And that would be called, that's called your Dorian. And that's a really interesting scale sound. Your brain wants to always resolve it because you're starting from right here. But what's cool about this is if I played an A minor, typically your ear wants to hear. That's a very A minor sound. But because of the way the mode opens up this new flavor to playing over different chords. So I play an A minor here. Right? So it gives you this kind of interesting little spice, and that's where the modes can get really tasteful, and you can go in all different directions from there. But to answer your question, yeah, if you use the vertical, if you go the vertical position, but you move it horizontally, if you maintain the exact same finger sequences, you'll play in a different key, right? So if I played this scale, but I just moved that to the next note that would be in G major, right? I go up a whole step. Now I'm just playing in A major if I keep the same sequence of fingers, right? So that's what's good, but also a little bit confusing about these. Number one, if you have a couple of good major scale patterns under your fingers, you can shift them everywhere you want. But if you want to start thinking in terms of modes, the notes, the overall notes are going to stay the same, but the pattern is going to change because you're starting on a different note of that major scale. So I hope that's not too complex. I hope I didn't make it any more muddy for you. The next one here, is it okay to sometimes use different fingers for certain chords? Different fingers for certain chords? Absolutely. I remember when I first started, It's funny because when I first started, I just didn't know. I was just listening to every rule that came at me and just thought, okay, I guess that's the way to do it. I guess that's the way to do it. And after a while, you start to see conflicting things, right? Play an F with a bar here. Don't play an F with a bar here. Play an F with your first and second finger here. Don't play an F with your first and second finger here. Learn to do the full bar, you know? And so there can be these sort of conflicting things. And I started to feel that there's a sense of freedom. There's a lot of freedom in what is quote unquote correct technique, right? If you can play the sound and you can play it efficiently, thoroughly, there's clarity, you're not in any crazy position that's going to detract from switching to another chord, then you're kind of really on the right, geographic location on a map of really good technique. Don't feel like it has to be a pinpoint. There is a region, you can be within a region. So I remember when I was learning F and having the hardest time doing this, that little bar here, right? And I know a lot of people have had this experience, maybe you have too. And by accident, after not being able to get this sound because it was sort of, having a hard time here, we did cover bar chords in a previous lesson. I believe that was in number 2, so you can refer back to that. But you can lift your first finger off, right? And from there, now all of a sudden, you have a really new kind of chord here. Sorry, message, the same question, okay. Now you have a new opportunity here. This is called an F major 7, right? You don't need to know the name of that, but this is a different way of playing an F that opens up a new opportunity, right? So yes, you can play it this way, you can play it this way. When I first started and I accidentally stumbled across this, I just started playing all of my Fs with that in it, right? And it just, sometimes it worked really well, sometimes it didn't, and I had to figure out a different way. Another good chord is that a lot of people will play a G this way, right? Or you can play it this way, right? With your second, third, and fourth. Or you can go and play this way. This is probably one of the most common ways to do it. Or an A, sometimes people play it this way. Or sometimes 1, 2, 3. Or 2, 3, 4. If, every guitar is just a little bit different shape. Everyone's fingers are a little bit different shape. Start to look for things that are efficient for you. Don't just make an excuse, well, okay, I've played it this way for so long, so that's it. Maybe this is putting extra stress on this knuckle that makes it harder to get back to a C later, But maybe not, and if not, that's okay, right? So when you see conflicting information, you get from, one source says this, one source says this, learn to take all of it into account and find what is the right path for you. I think that's how you grow in wisdom as a player, All right, so let's go on to the next scale here. So here we are at exercise number 4, and this is a descending scale sequence. Now, if you've played a major scale over and over, and you get sick of it, this is a very common thing that us guitar players do. And we want to learn, remember, we want to learn to train smart here. We tend to get something under our fingers just long enough to almost grasp it. Then we move on, we go to the next thing. And oftentimes, we're right on the cusp of really, really starting to learn it, or starting to really thoroughly know something. And we bail because we sort of lose interest. So one thing that's really good is to look at the exact same thing that you're practicing and just change it up a little bit so that you're still practicing the thing that you want to really refine it. But this solves the boredom issue, because it's important to keep the will engaged. Playing guitar is not just about just putting in your time and then hoping that results come, right? You want to train smart, but you also want to enjoy it. Somebody who has a real love for the process will always sort of outmatch a person who just, you just show up each day and I hope I get better if I just do A, B, and C. You have to find ways to really keep that will and to ignite, keep your inspiration alive, right? And one thing that does that for me is just changing up something I've played a whole bunch of times and just putting it from a slightly different perspective. So this is a scale sequence where instead of, going, right? So this is exercise number 4 here. We're gonna do a scale sequence where you're gonna go, and now I go back one note, then I go up, and then. So in the end, you're playing something, but the principle there is just change it up, because I think the most thorough way to really grasp an idea is to make sure that you really understand it first. And then from that point, the practicing starts. And a lot of times we get a little bit fuzzy in the understanding it part. We play it a few times and then on to the next thing. And that's fine, but sometimes you really want to clean up your playing. And remember, we want to train smart here. So the practicing starts after you really have sort of understood the mechanics. And interestingly enough, as I want to pound into, this lesson has been pounded into me time and time again, is that the fastest way to really get something is to play it what feels like ridiculously slow, right? And that's okay, because every single micro movement, your brain is looking for patterns, looking for a way to synthesize it, to put it all together. And the best thing you can do is go slow enough so that it actually comes all together, right? So here's a different way of playing the major scale. So let's start this, number 4. So let's look at the tab there, and this is at 72 beats per minute. 1, 2, ready, go. Again, go. Again, ready, go. One more time, ready, go. Excellent. Okay, so what we want to do now is we're going to shift here. Let me just go to my next paper here. And now this is, so we've done open string. We started with a 1 octave scale, right? Now we've gone 2 octave scale. Now we want to go a 2 octave scale, but not in open position. We want to do this all fretted notes. The reason why is if you do this with all fretted notes, this is where you can switch to any key. You can play in any key. You just have to know where your root note starts. So this is one of the most common scales that you'll head into anytime you see modes, that we talked about a couple of minutes ago. And this is the G Ionian scale, and it sounds like this. Right? So I hope it's starting to become a little bit more clear that you can play the same sound in so many different ways. So this frees you up on the fretboard. You can play this string, some of these positions open. You can shift them up here, which we will. We're gonna get all the way up to this spot of the fretboard. And you wanna start seeing those connections and also using your ear to recognize those connections. That, right? Right, you have the same sound in different spots. And this starts to help the fretboard playing above the 3rd fret feel a little bit less terrifying and scary. I remember when I first started, it was like, this is the beginner territory. This is sort of the intermediate, and then the advanced go all the way up here, right? And I remember learning that above the 12th fret, everything repeats, like we talked about the conveyor belt. So that made sense to me, but it was like this, the 7th fret up to the 12th. That felt a little bit dark and mysterious, and so we're gonna do some work on that coming up soon. All right, so for this one, we want to repeat the same thing we did before, in that you sort of reserve a finger for each fret. So all the notes that are going to be played on the 2nd fret, I'm going to use my 1st finger. All the notes that are played on the 3rd fret, I'm going to use my 2nd finger. All the notes on the 4th fret, my 3rd, and then all the notes on the 5th fret, my 4th. So I'm sort of lining up like this position here. And from there, I'm actually going to make sure that I remember, we talked about this with the positioning, hand position in a previous lesson, but just a quick reminder that you want to keep your hand back, right, behind the neck, point it up, and line it up with wherever your middle finger goes. The reason why that's important is because if you do a stretch from here, let's say you get used to playing up this way, if your thumb is all the way up here, and sometimes it'll creep up a little bit, and that's okay. You just want to be aware because that might really, really limit your ability to reach with your pinky. And then you start getting frustrated and think, my pinky never responds and I'm going to give up on the pinky altogether. And then he feels left out. All the rest of the kids are having fun and he's the little brother trying to tag along like, I want to play too, come on. Well, all you have to do is reposition the thumb and now it's in a much more easy position to be able to play. So he can offer something to guitar playing. The pinky is your friend. Embrace that, right? And so the other thing is that your elbow, I remember there was a lot of issues that I had just realizing, oh my gosh, I'm actually playing with my elbow down here, right? And if your elbow is restricted, that can sort of inhibit your ability to stretch some of these things as well. So take that into account. Look at your thumb position, right? So is my thumb too high? Is my thumb lined up with the 3rd finger or maybe the 1st, right? You want to line up the thumb so it's pointed up, line up with your middle finger, and then you can do a slight tilt on the wrist, but make sure your elbow is free, right? And I think that will help. So we're going to start with the 2nd finger on the 3rd fret, and we're going to go to the 4th finger on 5th. And then do your 1st finger on the A string on the 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 5th fret. And you can see how if your finger is already sort of spread out, ready to attack, you're not shifting like this each note. Right? You want to try to think about just efficiency, economy of motion. So go slow enough to actually catch your hand in the act doing these big wide stretches because it's just extra work, right? It's like driving, or it's like riding your bike on a completely level stretch of road in gear, with your brakes on, right? Or in like a really high gear. It's extra work, you can do it, but it's just not necessary, So just take the brakes off, Tension in your hand position, right? So we have the 2nd, 4th, 1, 2, 4, and then, so that's referring to the left hand fingers, and then your 1st finger on the D string, and then on the G, and then on the 2nd, and then from there we'll go back down. Excellent. Now in the tab, in measure 27 here, I had an open string that should be the 5th fret here, that final one. So just remember, we're not going to do an open string in this. You're just going to stick to this pattern here. So let's try that together. Here we go at 72 beats per minute. You know what? Let's try this. I'm going to back this up to 60 just so you get a little bit more comfortable with this hand position. Because if you've really, really labored at this a lot and you feel like, my reach, I always feel like I'm struggling to reach, a lot of times it's just that thumb position. So it may feel a little bit more difficult at first, but you have to ask yourself, is this more difficult or is this just unfamiliar? This might be a more efficient way to play when you shift here, but you may have years of muscle memory doing it a different way. So that's something, your call. You have to sort of just really analyze and honestly ask yourself, like, is this just a muscle memory thing it seems to be fighting? Or is this just not a comfortable way to play? And you have to sort of find a happy medium between the thumb up here, or maybe the thumb a little bit closer to your 1st finger. Find what works for you, but really analyze what is unfamiliar versus what is just too uncomfortable to play, right? So let's try this at 60 beats per minute. 1, 2, ready, go. Again. Again. Excellent. Now here is the great thing about guitar. You do that exact same thing and you shift it up 2 frets. Now we're in A. You can learn to play in any key by just having this pattern, right? Well, that's great. You just have to know where your low string is, where your point to start. So if I started on G here, and I go up to here on the 8th fret, okay, so G, A, B, C, and then I play this. Right? So now I'm playing a C major, right? So that's one of the cool things about this. Whereas if you played any piano, you know that as soon as you want to go from G to A, it's an entirely different pattern, right? Entirely different pattern on the keys. With guitar, it's great. It's a conveyor belt, right? You just shift it up and there you go, you're in the next key. So that's one of the cool things about this pattern. Again, let me know if you have any questions. I answered a few so far, but we'll just keep rolling on through here. What I want to do here in number 6, let me get my sheet here. Squeaky chair, again. I'll make sure that the new shed will not have a squeaky chair. I'll have a brand new chair. Ooh. Okay, so in number 6, what we want to start to do is look at little bits of a scale pattern found in a different or sort of unfamiliar part of the fretboard. So remember we talked before about learning to find that you can do the same sound in different spots. This G is the same pitch as this, same pitch as this, right? So if I did this, I went from this G and then I climbed down a half step and then a whole step, right? I find this next spot here, right, which would be here. You can do it that way, but an octave lower. It's the same thing. And so now you start to see what is familiar here is gonna show up in this spot here. So we want to really get a little more comfortable with the dark spot on the neck. You know, you're stumbling through the house, this giant mansion when you start playing guitar, and you know, you're just looking in a different room and the lights are out and you got this flashlight going, and after a while you start to see like, okay, I've been in this room before. Oh, I remember this hallway. Okay, I got it, you know. It's not mastery of the entire map of the whole house, it's just familiarity with different elements of each room. And so this is kind of a dark spot that you'll start to see, oh, I guess I do know this spot of the fretboard because I've played the same pitches here, right? So what we want to do, and so yeah, exercise 6 here, is you're going to start with 6, 7, okay, yeah, and then the last one. Exercise 6, put your second finger on the 10th fret of the A. And we're just going to go up 1 octave and then come back down from there. You're going to go up and then use your your fourth finger is going to be on the A string with your fourth finger there. And then your first finger on the 9th fret of the D. Right? Which is the same pattern we played here, right? And then use your second finger, and then your fourth. Okay, and then we're all the way up here, first finger on the 9th of the G, and now third finger on the 11th and 12th. Because remember, we have a whole step, half step, whole, and then half there. And then we'd go back from there. down, just like that. So let's try this. We'll stay at 60. Let's do 60 beats per minute. 1, 2, ready, go. Then repeat. Last time. Excellent. Okay, now when we get to number 6 here, I'm sorry, on number 7. Number 7 is actually, now that we started with 1 octave, we went to 2 octaves, and now looking at 3 octaves. So 3 different registers of the same pitch, right? So we talked about you can do the same note here, as here, right? But now we can think about different octaves, meaning we'll play the note here, the lowest octave, and then you play here, and then you have all the way up here. And this is sort of an octave shape. So the quickest way to find an octave is this little kernel here. Whatever note you're playing, this is gonna be for like the bottom 2 strings here. Whatever note you're playing, just go down 2 strings and over 2 frets, and you're gonna get to the same octave. So that forms that shape. Now, once you get up to here, this is a little different, because remember when you first started learning to tune your guitar, you tune 5th fret to 5th fret, 5th fret, 5th fret, 5th fret, 5th fret, and then the 4th fret. So that throws everything off 1 fret, so you have to go actually one higher. But now we've gone from here, so over 2, up 2. Now for this one, to get to the next octave, we're gonna go down, up 2, and then go over 3. And so you have this pattern here. So that means that anything that you can play in a lower octave, if you know where that pattern is, you can immediately play in a higher octave too. And again, we want options. It's really important as players not to just be stuck with a couple of patterns, but the more vocabulary you have, the more familiarity you have, the more you can express. That's the important thing, right? So if I play just those notes right there, then I go to the next octave, so I go up and then over 2, right? And then I go up from here and over 3, right? So you can start to see the pattern there. Now, one specific shape is going to go from the 3rd fret, right? Actually, the 2nd fret would be the lowest note, all the way up to the 10th fret in the same shape. And it even works out to be the same exact scale sequence or finger sequence as well. Right? So I like to play this. I've done this exercises with this where I would just go start the whole thing on the 2nd fret and just go start 1 note lower than the root note, and then do the same thing. Which is just a really fun thing. I think I learned that originally from Paul Gilbert, who's a fantastic electric shred guy and just a really great teacher too. And so just starting to look at any little bit of melody or scale and learning to find that in another spot of the fretboard as quickly as possible is really important, because again, you want to start to see those relationships. We're not just practicing, putting in the time to just hope that some progress happens. We want to be smart about it and find the easiest ways for the information that we gather in our training to really start to synthesize so that a big, clear picture starts to come into view. So let's try this now. We're going to do it at 60 beats per minute. And remember, you're going to start with your second finger. You're going to go 2, 4, 1, 2, 4. Then you're going to do the same thing here. 2, 4, 1, 2, 4. And then 2, 4, 1, 2, 4. That's going to start on the 3rd fret. Then you're going to go to the 5th fret of the D. And then you're going to go to the 8th fret of the B. Let's try it here at 60 beats per minute together. One, two, ready, go. Next one. Now switch, second finger. Right? So we're basically, we were playing the same pattern on the way up, but now let's actually go the way back down. So I wanted to play it this way first. So we're playing the identical shape, and then here. But now we want to descend like, and then chase this down here, and then pinky down here. So I think both ways are really important. Let's try it. Let's try going ascending and then the descending on the way back down. 2, ready, go. Now 10. Now 5th on the A. Excellent. Let's try it one more time. And let's just eliminate, there's a whole note in between, and let's just try to go straight through from position to position. I think it's important to get comfortable with that transition to the next set, right? When you go to the next octave, but it's also good to be able to just from here, then go to the next one, immediately to the next one. So let's try that quickly. 1, 2, ready, go. Excellent. So for our final exercise, we want to keep that concept going and just take one thing instead of starting on the root note. We're going to start on the 3rd here, right? Go, re. And from there, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to just do a little bit of a scale pattern. And we're going to actually span that all the way up from the 7th fret, all the way up 15. And we're going to do the same thing here. We're doing the same little chunk of the scale. And then we're going to go an octave higher and then an octave higher from here. So that sounds like this. So you're basically going 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4, and then the next one 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4, and then you'd work your way back down. So let's try that. 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4, and then remember that octave principle. You go over, down 2 strings, over 2 frets, then you're at the next one. And then we'll go back down. All right, let's try that together. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Now down. One more time. All right, so again, in review, the whole idea is that the major scale is the foundation of everything else. It's sort of the roots. And the tree has all these other branches and leaves, but it's really important to come, to get a good understanding of where the roots are, right? And from a good understanding of that, then it makes it easier to learn all these other things. So the theory of knowing what a major scale is important, but getting a handle on a couple of different ways to play those same pitches in different spots on the fretboard, in different octaves, then things start to come together and make a little bit more sense. So when you see someone doing a solo here and jumping all the way up here and thinking, how does he know all of those fretboard, how does he know the fretboard that well, or all those frets up there? It's because it's familiar territory, and the only way to get familiar with something is to go there again and again, and then start to see, oh, you know what, I remember this. This is the same pitch as I did down here. And then the neck doesn't become scary, it becomes an opportunity, right? And so we talked about doing it in 1 octave, in 2 octaves, and in 3 octaves. The other thing you want to do is just make sure that you don't ever feel bad for playing something really slowly, because oftentimes little problems that you have in your playing that you may have wrestled with for months or even years, sometimes that's solved by a really, really, really good, thorough 5 to 10 minutes of problem solving. You want to problem solve, you want to get a handle on what the issue is, and then you want to practice from there or put it into the muscle memory repetition. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Next week we're going to talk about pentatonic scales and a couple of tricks without those in some different octaves and how to approach them beyond just thinking of the simple box, the box analogy. So I've had a blast so far. This will be hopefully the last one in the basement here. And then I will see you next week in the woodshed, and we will take it from there. So have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.